Good morning. Today we're going to take a look at factoring a problem where we need to use multiple of our factoring methods in order to get to the end of the problem. So if you have not watched my video on factoring by grouping, take a look at that. If you have not watched my video on difference of squares, take a look at that. Both of those are going to be involved in today's problem. So let's get to it. So here's today's problem. We're going to factor x cubed plus 3x squared minus 4x minus 12. So as I look at this problem and I sift through my different methods, I notice this one has 4 terms. And I know that often when a problem has 4 terms, factoring by grouping can help me out. So I'm going to start with that. And I'm going to group it like this, where I'm going to put the first 2 terms in one group, and I'm going to put the second 2 terms in the next group. And I'm going to be careful to include this minus in this group. All right, now as you'll recall with factoring by grouping, my next step is to ask what is the greatest common factor that I can factor out, divide out of both terms. So as I look at this first group, I see this one's all made up of x's, and this one I have 3 times an x squared. So I see that x squared is common to both terms. So my next step is to factor that out. And then I ask myself, well, what's left in each term? So x cubed divided by x squared leaves me with x, and 3x squared divided by x squared leaves me with 3. And so I've completed that for my first grouping. Now I do it again. I look at my negative 4x and my negative 12, and I say, what is the greatest common factor? Well, I see that a 4 is in both, and I see that a negative 4 is in both. So I'm going to factor out a negative 4. And then I ask myself what's left of each term. So negative 4x divided by negative 4 leaves me with x, and negative 12 divided by negative 4 leaves me with positive 3, because remember, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Now I do my check to make sure that grouping worked. What's inside the parentheses must be the same thing. If it isn't, grouping was not the way to solve this. But it is, hooray. So my last step is I factor this term out of both of those terms. So I factor that out, and what I'm left with from each term is x squared times x plus 3 divided by x plus 3 leaves me with x squared. And negative 4 times x plus 3, when I divide out the x plus 3, leaves me with, great. This term is done. It's as fully factored as it can be. This term is looking suspicious. X squared minus 4. X squared and 4 are both squared things. Minus is a difference. This is a difference of squares. And I recall that a difference of squares factors like this. And if you don't remember why that is, go ahead and check out my video on difference of squares. But let's go ahead and apply that to our x squared minus 4. So our final factorization looks like this. Now let's take this one step further and not just factor it, let's solve. So let's say our original equation said equals 0. And so we'll add that to each of our steps. Well, for one thing times another thing times another thing to equal 0, that only occurs when one or more of these things equals 0. So our final step, now that we factored, is to take each of those factors and set them equal to 0. And when I solve each of those, I find that my 3 solutions to the equation all of this stuff equals 0 are when x is negative 3, when x is negative 2, and when x is 2. And so those are called the solutions or zeros or roots of my equation. And they will also be the place where my equation passes through the x-axis. And if you're interested in how we go from having factored this to having graphed this, then go ahead and check out one of my videos on rational equations and graphing them. All right, but that's a little taste of how to factor an equation when you need to use more than one method to get all the way to full factorization and to your solutions. So rewind the video, do it along with me, check out these other videos, and consider subscribing to my channel so that you can be alerted when I put out a new video and we can keep on mathing.